Alan Quinlan is with us to talk about the weekend's rugby and to look forward a little bit. It is the start of an Ireland International Week, and it looks like James Lowe is going to make his debut next Friday night against Wales. I, for one, am very thrilled about this because James Lowe is pretty good at rugby. What's he going to bring to the Ireland team that we don't have at the moment?
Now, he's going to bring ball carrying ability, and huge work rate. He's very difficult to stop, and he's a poacher. He's a finisher. He scores tries. I think he's going to be a huge addition, and probably the last project player that we'll see for a long time, given it's gone to 5 years now. He's not everybody, as I said the other day, will agree with the project players. Some still disagree and are heavily against it, but I think he's a top quality player who's been outstanding for Leinster and very, very physically strong. So he's going to certainly bring a lot of enthusiasm and quality to the Irish wing.
Defensively, there were there was certainly a period of adaptation to the Leinster setup, and there would constantly, the coaching ticket there would constantly have been, his work-ons were always defensive as opposed to attacking. Has he reached the point now where you'd be happy to stick him in an international team and say, yeah, that's fine, that aspect of the game is where it needs to be?
Well, he doesn't get tested as much as probably he will going forward with Ireland now. Leinster have been pretty dominant since he arrived here, and I suppose his biggest strength is his attacking ability and his ability to show up off scrum halves and out halves and look to get ball in his hands. He doesn't shoot out of the line traditionally like some wingers, but I think he can get stood up a little bit, I suppose by steppers, if you like. But I think obviously it's not a tackle technique issue, but I think he just sometimes can get a bit flat-footed when people are on the attack. But I think he's improved in that facet of the game. And look, we'll know more. International rugby is a different challenge, and it's a step up. But I think he's definitely going to bring a lot of quality to Ireland and give them more options, left-footed kick as well, and real power and strength going forward.
It's obviously not a must-win game, really, but it has the bang of a bit of a must-win from an Ireland perspective. We're 8-point favourites. Wales are in a very bad run of form at the moment. It's a non-existent, meaningless competition that, like, no one's ever going to remember in 5 years' time. But at the same time, they kind of need a win, right?
Yeah, they do. I think it's strange. It doesn't have that aura of excitement about this competition. The November internationals traditionally for me are big test matches. This is obviously a little bit different, but you'd prefer to win them than take momentum and positivity out of them than lose the games. I think there is going to be a bit of an opportunity to look at some newer players. Obviously for the Georgia game, it depends who Ireland have in that last playoff game. England's going to be a big test in Twickenham, but you'd much prefer to beat Wales at home on Friday night, and I think Ireland need to bounce back a little bit from that defeat in Paris. There was plenty of positives in the first half and stuff to work on, and we know they're trying to change the way they play the game. So there's an opportunity to kind of build a new era, if you like, for this team, and there has been a number of new players who've come in the last few weeks, and obviously we haven't seen a lot of. We've seen one championship under the new coaching ticket, so it'll be interesting to see how that plays out in the next couple of weeks. But it kind of is a must-win game in the sense that they want to try and get a little bit of momentum and a bit of a feel-good factor back in the side after what happened in Paris, particularly in the second half.
And building a new era might require a little bit of experimentation and a little bit of patience. What areas would you like to see Andy Farrell experiment with?
I think, I spoke about the back row for probably the last 12 months. He's after bringing in a number of players there. Caelan Doris, Will Connors. I think Dan Levy is still kind of working his way back. I'd love to see Ryan Baird get game time and see what he's like at that level. Obviously, we've got to sort out the full-back situation. And for me, I think the centres, when Ringrose is not there, we're lacking that little bit of a ability to break down teams. We're very direct and very strong, the centre. So I think there's the work-ons from what happened last year is the attack. So I don't think it's a case of wholesale changes on, but I think you need to try and nail down a full back and that centre partnership going forward for the Six Nations. The other area of concern, obviously, is the age profile of our 9 and 10. And there's not a lot you can do to change. I think the gap between Johnny Sexton and the other fly halves is as big as it ever has been. It's just unfortunate that Joey Carberry is not there and he's not getting valuable game time. Hopefully he'll get back, but maybe someone like Harry Byrne could get capped going forward as well, and see what he can do at international level. He's a very talented player. So there's probably right across the board. I think there's things that need to be better. There's a core group of a very good number of players in the team, but as I said, Ryan Baird is someone I'd love to see get in and get capped, and probably the biggest issue is who's going to be our full back for the Six Nations.
What do you make of the situation in Wales? Obviously, they had a successful year last year and then a disastrous championship from their perspective. There seems to be a lot of patience around the rebuilding from the Welsh rugby public, or more certainly patience in Wales than there might be in other parts of the world.
Well, there's no patience here around the Irish rugby team, and I think that probably stems from GAA circles. I think most of the negative comments you get about the Irish rugby team comes from GAA people on social media, and I have friends who are like that. I've said it before. It astonishes me how Wales can win we won a Grand Slam in 2018. We then get lambasted in 2019. Obviously, the World Cup is part of it. And the reaction here is massive. Wales win a Grand Slam in 2019 and they won one game this year, and the reaction is not the same. I think rugby is obviously number one sport there in Wales, and maybe there is a bit more patience there, but there seems to be a lot of angst against the Irish rugby team, and this private schools D4 scenario is always brought up, and I'm the exact opposite. I came through a Christian Brothers school, a GAA school, came from a kind of non-traditional rugby area. I know obviously there's a lot of history in my own rugby club in Clanwilliam and a lot of great rugby clubs around Tipperary, but it just surprises me a lot that reaction. You don't see it. I was kind of looking at a lot of the Welsh papers in the last week since they lost their last game against Scotland, and the reaction is not the same. The reaction, but it's probably an Irish thing because we see it with our football team as well. People calling for Stephen Kenny's head after 4 or 5 games, where there's no dose of realism or reality at times, and that's a frustration. But it's something you just have to live with. So I think the reaction is sometimes over the top. People criticise the Irish rugby team that they hype themselves up. They don't. Sometimes the papers hype themselves up, and we over excel, if you like, probably. And that was in 2018. It was an incredible year. So the big until Ireland kind of get to a World Cup semi-final, or go further, I think people will have that ammunition to kind of label and throw at the Irish rugby team. But for 4 provinces, a small pool of players, I think the glass is probably more half full, given what I grew up watching in the 90s, and probably the late 80s of results and Six Nations and wooden spoons and all that kind of stuff. So, that reaction just surprises me sometimes because, as I said, the reaction to Wales winning 1 game in the Six Nations this year is totally different to Ireland winning 3 games last year.
Why do you think that is?
Well, I think obviously in Wales, rugby is number one. There's a lot more people are into their rugby and they don't want to criticise as much. Obviously, they criticise, but not to the same extent. So you have people, anti-rugby people here who just don't like the game. They don't like the coverage it gets. As I said, I have friends in GAA circles who, over the last number of years, would say to me, "Oh, it's all the bloody rugby again in the back pages, and too much coverage of rugby. What about the GAA fixtures that are going on here, there, and everywhere?" And I love GAA as well. So that's probably why, Ger. I think it's there's an anti-rugby brigade in Ireland, and it stems from the perception that all rugby in Ireland is D4 and private schools, which I've said this many times. You go around down to Tipperary and you go to the clubs around where I live: Clanwilliam, Kilfeacle, Thurles, Cashel, Galbally, the passion and desire for rugby in all those clubs is phenomenal, and they're not rugby playing schools, you know. So there's, of course, loads of people love rugby, but you know, I suppose when Ireland excel and do pretty well, the knockers just come out and try and knock it. But look, it is what it is, and that's the way some people like to view other sports that they're not into themselves.
Yeah, no, it certainly it is a real thing, and it definitely exists.